She was kicked out by in-laws after husband's death, but unexpectedly, a vampire king rescued her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. Sarah had always believed that life could be hard, but never did she imagine that it could be this cruel. Just a few months ago, she was living a simple, albeit modest, life with her husband, Tom, in a small, cozy home in a quiet neighborhood. They had been married for 5 years, and though money was tight, they had each other, and that was enough. But when Tom unexpectedly died in a car accident, Sarah's world crumbled. The grief was unbearable, but that pain was only the beginning of her torment. Sarah had no family of her own to lean on, so she turned to her in-laws for support, hoping that they would comfort her during this difficult time. However, what she got instead was rejection and betrayal. The moment the funeral was over, her in-laws began to make it clear that they no longer wanted her in their lives. Tom's parents, once warm and welcoming, began making harsh comments about her being a financial burden. They claimed that Tom's death had left them financially strained, and Sarah, without a job or support system, was only making things worse. Within a week, they kicked her out of their family home. She had nowhere to go. With no savings and no job prospects, Sarah wandered the streets, feeling more lost and alone than ever before. Her only source of solace was the small backpack on her back, which held a few belongings. Nothing of value, but everything she had left. Sarah spent the next few days trying to find work, but with no luck. Each day, she walked the streets, hoping for some sign of a way out. But the world seemed indifferent to her suffering. She often found herself sitting in parks, watching families pass by, wondering what she had done to deserve this fate. One particularly cold night, as she sat on a bench, the winds howling through the empty streets, Sarah felt completely hopeless. She could no longer even cry. It was as if the weight of everything had crushed her spirit completely. She was on the verge of giving up when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned, expecting to see another passerby, but instead, there was a man standing before her. He was tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light. His presence was commanding, but there was something strangely comforting about it. Sarah's first instinct was to shrink away, but the man's gaze softened. "You look lost," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Are you okay?" Sarah nodded weakly, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days, and his sudden appearance felt surreal. "I have nowhere to go," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man studied her for a moment, and then, without saying another word, he extended his hand. "Come with me," he said. "I can help you." Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should trust him. But something about the way he looked at her, something in the warmth of his gaze, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. She stood up slowly and took his hand, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her as he led her away. Little did Sarah know, this encounter would change her life forever. The man, who would later reveal himself to be a vampire king, would become her protector, her savior, and someone who would make her question everything she thought she knew about life, fate, and love. But for now, she was too tired to question anything. All she could do was follow him, hoping that whatever came next would be better than the nightmare she had just survived. As Sarah followed the mysterious man through the darkened streets, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. It was as though his presence was somehow grounding her, offering her a reprieve from the chaotic whirlwind of her life. She had no idea where he was taking her, but something in her gut told her that for the first time in days, she was safe. The city around them was quiet, the only sounds being the soft crunch of their footsteps on the wet pavement and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. They walked in silence, and Sarah found herself clinging to the man's presence, her mind still reeling from the events that had led her here. They eventually reached an old building at the edge of the city, a place that seemed both ancient and modern at the same time. The door opened with a soft creak, and the man ushered her inside. It was dark inside, but she could make out the grandness of the place. Marble floors, towering ceilings, and heavy curtains draped over windows that reached the floor. It looked more like a palace than a home. The man led her up a winding staircase and into a large room, filled with bookshelves, ornate furniture, and an expansive fireplace that flickered softly. It was warm inside, a stark contrast to the cold, rainy night outside. "You're safe here," the man said as he gestured toward a large armchair. "Sit. I'll get you something to eat and drink." Sarah nodded, still unsure of what to make of everything. She sank into the chair, her body exhausted from the past few days. It felt like a dream, a world she had never imagined, yet somehow it felt like this was where she was supposed to be. As she sat there, trying to process everything, the man returned with a tray of food. It wasn't much, some bread, cheese, and fruit, but it was the first real meal she had had in days. Sarah took the food gratefully, her hands trembling slightly as she ate. She hadn't realized just how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. The man sat across from her, watching her closely. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice deep and calming. "I'm here to help you. I know what you've been through." Sarah looked up at him, a mix of confusion and curiosity in her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He leaned forward, his eyes softening. "My name is Lucian," he said quietly. "I'm not like other men. I'm not even fully human, but I can help you. I know what it feels like to lose everything, to be left with nothing." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him. His eyes, a piercing shade of amber, seemed to glow in the dim light of the room. There was something otherworldly about him, something that made her feel both uneasy and strangely comforted at the same time. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you helping me?" Lucian stood up and walked toward the window, his back to her. "Because I see something in you," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I see strength. I see someone who has endured more than most, and yet you're still standing. You've been tested, and you've survived." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as his words sank in. She had never felt strong. She had always seen herself as weak, someone who couldn't handle the challenges life threw at her. But Lucian's words made her see herself in a new light. "I don't know if I'm strong," she said quietly. "I've been through so much. I don't know how much more I can take." Lucian turned around to face her, his expression unreadable. "You'll never have to face it alone again," he said firmly. "I can offer you protection, shelter, and something more, if you're willing to accept it." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine at his words. Protection? From what? From whom? She wanted to ask, but she was too afraid of the answer. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian walked back to her, his steps silent on the marble floor. "There are people who would hurt you, Sarah," he said gently. "People who want to see you suffer. But I won't let that happen. I can offer you a new life, one where you don't have to worry about being alone, about being powerless. I can give you strength, just like you've given me strength." Sarah looked at him, a mix of fear and hope flooding her chest. She had no idea what kind of strength he was talking about, or what it would cost her to accept his offer. But in that moment, she realized something. She couldn't go back. She couldn't go back to the life she had left behind, to the family that had betrayed her, to the hopelessness she had felt just days ago. She had to move forward. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice steady now. Lucian's eyes softened, and for the first time, he smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Trust me," he said simply. "Trust me, and I'll show you the way." Sarah woke up the next morning feeling disoriented. The warmth of the room was a stark contrast to the coldness of the streets she had walked just a few days ago. She lay there, staring at the high, vaulted ceiling, still trying to make sense of everything. Lucian's offer, his words, they felt so surreal. She had gone from living in fear and despair to being in a place where she was treated with care and kindness. It was hard to believe it was real. As she lay there, trying to piece together the events of the night before, she heard a soft knock on her door. She sat up quickly, her heart racing for a moment. Who could it be? "Come in," she said, her voice a little shaky. The door opened, and a maid entered, carrying a tray of food. "Good morning, miss. His Majesty requests your presence," the maid said, setting the tray on the table beside the bed. Sarah blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. His Majesty? Was she referring to Lucian? The words still felt foreign in her mouth. She nodded, still a little confused. "Thank you," she murmured. After the maid left, Sarah got up and dressed in the clothes that had been left for her. They were simple, yet elegant, and they fit her perfectly. She couldn't help but feel that, in some strange way, she belonged here now. When she made her way downstairs, she was greeted by the grand hall she had seen the night before. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light, and the air was thick with the scent of wood and fire. She felt a chill run down her spine as she walked deeper into the castle. It was magnificent but intimidating, like something out of a fairy tale. Except this was no fairy tale. She was in the heart of a world she didn't understand, surrounded by secrets and things she could never have imagined before. When she reached the main dining hall, Lucian was already there, standing by the large, ornate fireplace. His presence filled the room, and for a moment, Sarah felt like she was drowning in it. His amber eyes turned to her as she entered, and he smiled. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "Please sit." Sarah did as he asked, her nerves still on edge. She wasn't sure what to expect from him now, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel both seen and vulnerable. "I hope you slept well," Lucian said as he poured tea into a delicate porcelain cup. Sarah nodded. "Yes, thank you." They sat in silence for a moment before Lucian spoke again. "I know this is all overwhelming for you, but I need you to understand that I didn't bring you here out of charity. There's a reason I've offered you my protection." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are no ordinary woman, Sarah. There is something inside you, something powerful. I have been watching you, and I know what you are capable of." Sarah frowned, not understanding. "I don't know what you mean. I'm just a woman who's been through a lot." Lucian's gaze softened, but there was a hint of something else, something deeper. "No, Sarah. You are not just anyone. You are part of a much larger story. A story that began long before you were born, and one that will change the course of history." Sarah felt a shiver run through her, but she didn't know how to respond. She had spent so much time trying to survive, trying to get by from day to day, that she hadn't stopped to question why things were happening the way they were. She had never asked for any of this. "I don't understand," she whispered. Lucian stood up and walked toward the window, his back to her. "You will," he said quietly, "but not all at once. There are things you need to know, things that are better understood with time. All I ask is that you trust me." Sarah stood up, her hands shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can. I don't know what to believe anymore." Lucian turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "That's the problem, isn't it? You've been forced to believe in things that have hurt you. But now, you have the opportunity to believe in something different, something that will empower you." Sarah felt a flicker of hope rise within her. She had never believed she had any real power. All she had ever known was struggle, fear, and pain. But there was something about Lucian, something in the way he spoke, that made her wonder if maybe she had more strength than she had ever realized. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady for the first time. Lucian smiled, though it was a small smile, as if he knew exactly what she needed to hear. "All I want is for you to find your strength. I want you to see the power inside yourself. I want to help you reclaim what was taken from you." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, trying to read his expression. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. There was something about him that was magnetic, that made her feel like she could trust him, even when every part of her screamed to be cautious. But deep down, she knew that this was her chance. This was her opportunity to change the course of her life. "I'll trust you," she said finally. "But I need to know the truth. I need to understand what's happening." Lucian nodded, his gaze intense. "You will," he said. "In time." As he spoke, a strange sense of calm washed over Sarah. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she was about to find the answers she had been searching for. The days following Sarah's decision to trust Lucian were a whirlwind of new experiences and unexpected discoveries. She found herself living in a world that felt both ancient and modern, a strange mix of luxury and mystery. The castle, with its towering walls and dark corners, felt like it held secrets in every stone, secrets that Lucian had yet to reveal to her. She spent most of her time in a large library filled with books on subjects she had never even imagined. Some were written in languages she couldn't understand, while others spoke of worlds long forgotten. It was overwhelming, yet fascinating, and Sarah couldn't help but be drawn into the pages, even as her mind struggled to accept what was happening to her. Lucian kept his distance at times, allowing her space to adjust, but he never truly left her alone. He would appear in the library, standing silently in the doorway, watching her as she read or wandered through the vast halls. His presence was always there, like a shadow that never quite vanished. And yet, every time their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Lucian wasn't just a stranger offering her shelter. He was something more, something ancient and powerful, and Sarah could feel it in the air around him. One evening, as Sarah sat near the grand fireplace in the library, her eyes tracing the words in an old book, Lucian finally spoke. "You have begun to learn the truth," he said, his voice deep and steady. Sarah looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. Lucian stepped forward, his gaze intense as he looked at her. "There is more to your story than you realize, more than you could have ever imagined. And it's time for you to know it." Sarah's pulse quickened. She had known, deep down, that this moment would come, that there were things Lucian hadn't told her, things that could change everything. She had seen the way he looked at her sometimes, as though she was something significant, something he had been waiting for. But she never pushed him to explain. Now, as the flickering firelight danced across his face, she felt a mix of fear and anticipation. "What do you mean by my story?" she asked softly. Lucian's expression softened, and for the first time since they had met, she saw a trace of vulnerability in his eyes. "You are not just any woman, Sarah. You are tied to this world in ways you do not yet understand. Your family, your bloodline, it holds a key to something much greater than you realize." Sarah's confusion deepened. "My family, my bloodline." Lucian nodded slowly, as if weighing his words carefully. "Yes, your grandmother knew this, and she kept it from you. But now it's time for you to know the truth. Your past is connected to a power, one that has been dormant for centuries, but it is awakening now. You have a part to play in this, Sarah." Sarah's mind raced. Her grandmother had always been a mystery to her, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that her family was connected to something so extraordinary. "I don't understand," she whispered. Lucian moved closer, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "Your grandmother was part of a secret lineage, a lineage that traces back to the ancient ones. They were not human, and neither are you. Your bloodline is tied to a curse, and that curse has followed you, even now." Sarah recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. "A curse?" she repeated, the word echoing in her mind. "Yes," Lucian said softly. "A curse that has plagued your family for generations. But it is not just a curse. It is also a gift. And now, it's your turn to decide what to do with it." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to comprehend what Lucian was saying. She had always thought of herself as an ordinary woman, someone who simply had bad luck. But now, she was hearing that her bloodline was tied to something far greater than she could ever have imagined. Something ancient, something powerful. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," she admitted, her voice trembling. Lucian smiled slightly, a hint of sadness in his expression. "You don't have to do anything yet. But you will, Sarah. The time is coming when you'll need to choose." Sarah's mind was spinning, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had just changed in a way she couldn't undo. The man who had saved her from a life of despair was now telling her that she was part of something far bigger, something far darker than she had ever imagined. And with that realization came a heavy burden. She had always thought she was just a survivor, but now, she was something more. "What do I have to do?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Lucian's gaze softened as he looked at her. "First, you need to learn who you truly are," he said. "And then, you will have to choose your path. The power inside you is yours to control, but it can also destroy you if you let it." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing everything he had said. She had no idea where this new journey would take her, but one thing was clear. Her life was no longer just about survival. It was about something much greater. And no matter how frightened she was, she knew she couldn't turn back. The next few days were a whirlwind of new revelations for Sarah. Each moment seemed to bring more questions, more doubts, and more uncertainty about the path that lay ahead. Lucian had kept his distance at times, but he was always nearby, watching her, guiding her through this strange new world. She spent her days in the library, poring over ancient texts and learning things about herself that she could never have imagined. As Lucian had promised, there was power inside her, but it was a power she didn't yet understand. She had always been a survivor, but now, she was beginning to realize that survival was no longer enough. There was something more at play, something that had been set in motion long before she had ever arrived in the castle. One evening, as Sarah sat in the grand library, lost in the pages of an ancient book, Lucian appeared before her once again. His presence was magnetic, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze on her as he approached. "You're learning quickly," he said, his voice smooth and calming. "But there's still much you don't understand." Sarah looked up at him, her brow furrowing. "What don't I understand?" she asked. Lucian's expression softened, but there was a hint of something darker in his eyes. "The power inside you, Sarah. It's not just a gift. It's a curse that has been passed down through your bloodline for generations. And now, it's starting to awaken." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as his words sank in. A curse? She had suspected as much, but hearing it from Lucian's lips made it all the more real. "A curse?" she whispered, the word heavy on her tongue. "Yes," Lucian replied, his voice low. "The curse of your bloodline is one of both strength and destruction. It has the power to shape the world, but it can also destroy everything in its path if you're not careful." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she processed his words. She had always felt different, but she had never imagined that her very existence was tied to something so dangerous. "How do I control it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucian stepped closer, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "That's what you need to learn. You have the ability to harness this power, but it takes time, patience, and trust. Trust in yourself, and trust in me." Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had always been cautious, afraid to trust anyone, but something about Lucian felt different. He was unlike anyone she had ever known, and despite the danger that surrounded him, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady now. Lucian smiled slightly, a hint of pride in his expression. "You need to face the past, Sarah. You need to understand the history of your bloodline and the curse that comes with it. Only then will you be able to control the power inside you." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a surge of determination wash over her. She had no idea what this journey would entail, but she knew one thing. She couldn't back down now. She had come too far, and she had too much to lose. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice firm. Lucian's smile widened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "We start with the truth. The truth about your family, about your past, and about the power that runs through your veins." The days that followed were filled with intense training and difficult lessons. Lucian took her to the deepest chambers of the castle, where ancient relics and texts were hidden away, waiting to be discovered. He taught her how to unlock the dormant power within her, how to harness it without letting it consume her. It was exhausting work, both physically and mentally, but Sarah felt herself growing stronger with each passing day. Lucian was patient, guiding her through the process step by step. He pushed her to her limits, but never too far. He knew that if she was going to master this power, she needed to learn how to control her emotions, how to focus her mind, and how to trust herself. One evening, after hours of practice, Sarah collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Lucian watched her silently from across the room, his expression unreadable. "You've done well," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But this is just the beginning." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes burning with determination. "I won't stop," she said, her voice steady. Lucian nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I know you won't." As Sarah continued her training, she began to realize something. The power she was learning to control wasn't just about strength or magic. It was about something deeper, something that connected her to the very fabric of the world around her. She was beginning to understand her place in this strange, ancient world. She was no longer just a victim of fate. She was becoming something more. But even as she embraced this new power, Sarah knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There were still many dangers lurking in the shadows, and the curse that ran through her veins was not something to be taken lightly. Lucian had warned her about the destructive potential of the power, and she had seen glimpses of it in her training. But despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, Sarah felt a surge of hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Sarah woke up to the soft glow of the early morning sun streaming through the curtains of her room. It had been several weeks since she had arrived at Lucian's castle, and each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and a growing understanding of the power that was awakening inside her. The world outside had become a distant memory, a life she no longer recognized. As she adjusted to this new reality where magic, danger, and ancient curses were now a part of her existence. Lucian had been patient with her, teaching her how to control the power within her, but she still felt like there was so much more to learn. Her training had been intense, emotional, mental, and physical, and it often left her feeling drained, as if the weight of it all was too much for her to bear. But she knew she couldn't stop. She had come too far, and there was no going back now. One morning, after a particularly grueling training session, Lucian took her to a secluded part of the castle, a hidden courtyard surrounded by ancient stone walls, covered in ivy and moss. It was a place of serenity, untouched by time, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of peace as she stepped into the quiet space. Lucian stood beside her, his presence as commanding as ever, but there was a gentleness in his gaze as he looked at her. "You've made incredible progress," he said, his voice soft. "But there is still much for you to learn, Sarah." Sarah looked up at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I thought I was learning everything I need to know," she said. Lucian nodded, but his expression grew serious. "There's more to this power than you realize. It's not just about control. It's about understanding the history that comes with it. The curse that runs through your bloodline isn't just a random affliction. It has a purpose that you need to understand if you are to truly master it." Sarah felt a chill run through her. She had always thought of the curse as something she had to fight, something she had to overcome. But now Lucian was telling her that it had a deeper meaning, something more than just a burden. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly, her heart racing. Lucian stepped forward, his gaze intense. "The curse in your bloodline is tied to an ancient prophecy. It is said that one day, someone with your blood will either bring destruction or salvation to this world. Your power is a key, but it can unlock something far greater than you can imagine." Sarah's mind spun. A prophecy? Was she really the one destined for something so important, so dangerous? She had never believed in fate, never thought that she was meant for anything other than survival. But now, standing in this strange courtyard, with Lucian's words weighing heavily on her, she wasn't so sure anymore. "So what do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian's expression softened, and he reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You need to understand the truth about your family, the people who came before you, the sacrifices they made. Only then will you be able to choose the path you will take." Sarah nodded slowly, trying to process everything. The prophecy, the power, her bloodline, it was all so overwhelming. But she knew one thing for certain. She had to learn more. She had to understand what was at stake, not just for herself, but for the world. Over the next few days, Lucian took Sarah deep into the heart of the castle, to a room filled with ancient scrolls and dusty books, hidden away from the rest of the world. It was a place that held the secrets of her past, of her family's history, and the prophecy that would shape her future. As Sarah pored over the texts, reading about the bloodline she never knew she had, she discovered things that shook her to her core. Her ancestors had been powerful beings, warriors, kings, and queens, who had fought to protect the world from an ancient evil that had once threatened to consume everything. But the power they wielded came at a cost. The curse that ran through her family's veins had been placed there to keep that evil at bay, but it had also left a mark on their souls, one that could never be erased. The more Sarah read, the more she realized that her own journey had already been set in motion long before she was born. She was the key to unlocking the final chapter of her family's story, and she had to decide whether she would use her power for good or for destruction. It was a heavy burden to bear, and Sarah felt a mix of fear and determination rise within her. She had always struggled to control her own life, but now, it seemed as if the fate of the world was in her hands. That night, as she sat alone in her room, contemplating everything she had learned, Lucian appeared at her door. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah looked up at him, the weight of his question sinking in. She wasn't sure what the future held, or what path she would take, But she knew one thing. She could no longer ignore the power that ran through her veins. She had to face it head-on. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Lucian smiled, a small but proud smile. "Then let's begin." As Sarah followed him through the corridors of the castle, she felt the stirrings of something deep within her. She was no longer just a survivor. She was part of something greater, something that could change the world. And for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days following Sarah's decision to face her destiny passed in a blur of training, revelations, and strange emotions. Lucian had been relentless in pushing her, testing her strength, and guiding her through the labyrinth of her family's dark past. Each day brought new lessons, new exercises to strengthen her control over the growing power within her. But as the lessons continued, so did the weight of the prophecy that Lucian had revealed to her. The more she learned, the more it became clear that she was no longer just a survivor of her past. She was being prepared for something greater, something far beyond what she could comprehend. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Lucian, ever watchful, had never been more than a few steps away, ready to offer guidance when needed. But as Sarah grew stronger, so did her desire to understand the full scope of the power she was harnessing. One evening, after a long day of training, Sarah stood by the window of her room, gazing out at the endless expanse of the castle grounds. The moonlight bathed the world in a soft, ethereal glow, and for a moment, she allowed herself to think about her old life, the life she had left behind. She remembered the days when she was simply a woman trying to get by, when everything seemed so simple and ordinary. But now, everything was different. She had a new purpose, a new path to walk, and with it, a burden she couldn't ignore. Lucian entered the room quietly, his presence almost invisible, but Sarah sensed him the moment he stepped inside. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he simply stood beside her, looking out at the night. "You're thinking about the past," he said softly. Sarah nodded. "I can't help it. I think about what I've lost, what I left behind. I don't even know if I can be the person you want me to be." Lucian's gaze softened as he turned to face her. "I don't want you to be anyone other than who you are, Sarah. You've already proven your strength. You've faced things no one should ever have to, and you've survived." Sarah shook her head. "But that's all I've done. Survive. I've never really had a chance to live. Not until now." Lucian reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. "You've never had the chance to live, because you've never known the truth. But now you do. And now, you have a choice." Sarah looked up at him, her heart pounding. "A choice?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" Lucian's eyes darkened as he stepped closer to her. "The power within you is not just a gift, Sarah. It is a key to something ancient, something dangerous. And you will be the one to decide whether it is used for destruction or for salvation. It's your choice." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she had felt like a puppet, pulled by forces beyond her control. But now, she was being told that she had the power to shape the future. Her future. She swallowed hard, trying to digest the enormity of what Lucian was saying. "But how do I choose?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lucian smiled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "You will know when the time comes. Trust yourself. Trust the power within you. It will guide you." Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers curling into fists as she tried to steady herself. "I've never had this kind of power. I've never had control over anything in my life. How can I trust something like this?" Lucian's voice softened. "Because you've always had control, Sarah. You've always had the power within you. You just didn't know how to access it. But now you do." Sarah's mind swirled with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The weight of the prophecy, the responsibility of her bloodline, it was all too much. But as she looked into Lucian's eyes, she saw something she had never seen before: hope. Not just for herself, but for the world. She wasn't alone in this. Lucian was by her side, guiding her, teaching her, and above all, believing in her. That belief, that unwavering support, gave her the strength to keep going. "I won't fail," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Lucian nodded, a rare look of pride in his eyes. "I know you won't." The days that followed were filled with even more intense training. Lucian continued to push her limits, but now there was a new sense of purpose in her movements. She wasn't just learning how to control her powers, she was learning how to trust them, how to trust herself. And as she did, she began to feel a change inside her. The more she trained, the more she understood. She wasn't just a victim of fate. She wasn't just a woman who had survived tragedy. She was a force in her own right, capable of shaping the future, capable of changing everything. One night, after a particularly difficult training session, Lucian approached her again, his expression serious. "Sarah, it's time," he said quietly. "Time for what?" she asked, her heart racing. "It's time for you to face the truth," Lucian replied. "It's time for you to understand the full scope of what you're capable of, and to see the consequences of your power." Sarah's chest tightened at his words. She had always known that there would come a time when she would have to face the full weight of her destiny. But now, as Lucian stood before her, she realized just how much was at stake. She had come so far, but there was still so much more to face. The choice was hers, but the future of everything was on the line. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. Lucian's eyes softened, but there was a glint of something dangerous in them. "Then let's begin." Sarah stood at the edge of the castle's grand courtyard, the weight of Lucian's words heavy in her chest. "It's time for you to face the truth," he had said. The time had come for her to understand what she was truly capable of, to come face to face with the power that had been locked inside her for so long. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead, but there was no turning back now. Lucian had always been there for her, guiding her, teaching her, but this felt different. This wasn't just about training anymore. This was about understanding her place in the world, the role she was meant to play in an ancient prophecy. The courtyard was silent, save for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant echo of footsteps approaching from behind. Lucian stepped into view, his eyes dark with purpose. "Come with me," he said, his voice calm but firm. Sarah followed him without question, her heart beating faster with each step. She had been to this part of the castle before, but tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, as though something monumental was about to unfold. Lucian led her through a narrow stone hallway, one she had never noticed before. The walls were lined with old tapestries, their intricate designs almost lost to time. They stopped in front of a large, ornate door, one that seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. "This is where the truth lies," Lucian said, his voice low. He placed his hand on the door, and it creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. The room was vast, filled with shelves upon shelves of ancient scrolls and books, their pages yellowed with age. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it, an old tome bound in dark leather. The book seemed to call to Sarah, its presence almost magnetic. Lucian stepped aside, allowing her to approach. "This is the Book of the Ancients," he said softly. "It contains the knowledge of your bloodline, the truth about your past, and the prophecy that has been woven into your very existence." Sarah reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the cover of the book. As soon as she touched it, a wave of energy coursed through her, and she felt a strange connection to it, as if the book had been waiting for her all along. She opened the pages slowly, her eyes scanning the ancient text. The words were in a language she couldn't quite understand, but they seemed to resonate with something deep inside her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the book. "This is your history, Sarah. Your family's legacy. It tells the story of the curse that runs through your blood, the power you possess, and the choices you will have to make." Sarah turned the pages, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what she was reading. The curse, the power, the prophecy, they were all interconnected, tied to her family's ancient past. She saw her own name written in the pages, but there was more, much more. There were references to an ancient evil, a darkness that had been sealed away centuries ago. But the prophecy spoke of a time when that darkness would rise again, and only someone with her bloodline would have the power to stop it, or unleash it. She looked up at Lucian, her heart pounding. "Am I supposed to stop this?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Lucian met her gaze, his eyes filled with both sadness and determination. "You are the key, Sarah. You were born to face this, to decide whether this power will save the world or destroy it." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak, and, for the first time, Sarah understood the true gravity of her situation. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She wasn't just learning to control a power she couldn't understand. She was being called to make a choice that would shape the future of the world. She closed the book, the finality of the moment sinking in. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucian stepped forward, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Now you choose. The darkness will not wait, and neither will the world. You must decide how to wield the power within you. But know this, Sarah, whatever choice you make, it will come with a cost." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had always felt lost, but now, she had a purpose. She was the one who would decide the fate of everything, whether she would use her power to protect the world or to destroy it. Lucian's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she saw something almost like sympathy in his gaze. "The path you choose will not be easy. There will be sacrifices, challenges, and darkness. But remember, you are not alone in this." Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. She wasn't just a woman caught in a web of fate anymore. She was the one who would decide how the story would end. As the silence between them grew, Sarah felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in days. The future was uncertain, the choices were hers to make, but one thing was clear, she was ready. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on. She would fight for the world she had come to love and protect, even if it meant sacrificing everything. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice steady. Lucian smiled, a small, approving smile. "Then let's begin." The days that followed Sarah's declaration of readiness were unlike anything she had ever experienced. Lucian had given her the space to process her newfound understanding of her family's legacy, but as the moments passed, the burden of her destiny grew heavier. The weight of her power, and the prophecy that tied her to the fate of the world, pressed down on her, making every breath feel like a step closer to the inevitable. Sarah knew there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and whatever came next, she would face it head-on. She spent her days in solitude, reflecting on the journey ahead, while Lucian observed from a distance, offering guidance when she needed it. As much as she wanted to delve deeper into the secrets of her bloodline, she knew that the time was not yet right. There were still many pieces of the puzzle to uncover, and Lucian had warned her that the path would be filled with challenges, some she couldn't yet anticipate. Then, one evening, everything changed. Sarah had been in the library, surrounded by scrolls and books, when Lucian appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. "It's time," he said quietly, his voice firm. "You need to see the council." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The council, the ancient group of beings who oversaw the balance of power in this strange world she had become a part of. They were the ones who held the true knowledge of the curse, of her bloodline's role in the prophecy, and of the dark forces that threatened to tear everything apart. "What do you mean?" she asked, rising from her seat. Lucian stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on her. "The time has come for you to meet them. You have to understand the full extent of the power you wield and the danger it poses. The council will decide what happens next." Sarah swallowed hard. She had heard stories of the council, beings of immense power, ancient in their ways, and not easily swayed. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge, the final authority in matters of magic and prophecy. To face them was to face the truth in its purest, most unforgiving form. But she knew this was a step she couldn't avoid. It was time to face the reality of what lay ahead. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice betrayed the fear that churned inside her. Lucian gave her a small nod, his expression softening slightly. "You may not feel ready, but you are. And no matter what happens, I will be by your side." They walked together through the castle's winding halls, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Sarah's mind raced with questions, but she didn't speak. She had too much to think about, too many emotions to sort through. When they reached the council chamber, the air grew thick with tension. The large, ornate doors opened with a creak, revealing a room bathed in shadow. At the far end of the chamber sat a long, stone table, around which several figures were seated, their faces obscured by the dim light. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped into the room, Lucian beside her. She could feel their eyes on her, though none of the council members spoke. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, the weight of centuries of knowledge and power hanging in the air. At the head of the table sat a tall figure, draped in dark robes, with eyes that glowed like molten gold. Lucian stepped forward, his voice steady but respectful. "The prophecy is unfolding," he said, addressing the figure. "She is ready to learn the truth." The figure at the head of the table nodded slowly, their gaze turning to Sarah. For a moment, the room seemed to shift, as if the very walls were closing in around her. "You are the one," the figure said, their voice like the whisper of 1,000 years. "The one chosen to decide the fate of this world. You will either save us or bring about our destruction." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had always known that her power carried weight, but hearing it spoken so plainly, so decisively, made everything feel far more real. The council was watching her, waiting for her to make her next move. "I've made my choice," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I will stop the darkness. I will fight to protect this world." The figure at the head of the table smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "You say that now," they said. "But understand this, Sarah. The path you walk is not one of certainty. The darkness you seek to fight is within you as much as it is outside. It will test you. It will try to break you. And when it does, you must be ready." Lucian's eyes never left her as the council members spoke. He knew the weight of the responsibility Sarah was about to bear. He had seen it in countless others, those who had tried and failed. But he also knew that Sarah was different. She was strong in ways no one else could understand. And though the council's words were meant to warn her, they didn't scare him. He believed in her. "What must I do?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. The figure at the head of the table leaned forward, their golden eyes gleaming. "You must seek the source of the darkness. You must find its heart and destroy it. Only then will the prophecy be fulfilled. Only then will you truly be free." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She had always thought that her power was the key to saving the world. But now, she understood that it wasn't just about her abilities. It was about making choices, facing the darkness, and finding the strength to rise above it. As the council members fell silent, Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew that she would face it with everything she had. This was her destiny. This was her fight. And she wasn't going to back down. The days following Sarah's meeting with the council felt like a blur. The weight of the prophecy, the immense responsibility she now carried, had left her feeling unsettled. The council had spoken, but their words were still echoing in her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was truly prepared for what lay ahead. Despite the reassurance Lucian had given her, there were moments when doubt crept in. She had been a survivor, always living one day at a time, but now, everything had changed. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting for something much larger than herself. The source of the darkness that the council had spoken of seemed distant, almost unreal, but she knew deep down that it was coming. The signs were there, subtle, but undeniable. The air felt heavier, the nights darker. It was only a matter of time before the world she had known would shift, and when it did, Sarah had to be ready. Lucian had kept his promise, staying by her side, offering guidance as she struggled to come to terms with the power inside her. He pushed her harder now, not just physically but emotionally. He was training her to face the darkness in herself, teaching her that the greatest battle she would face was not against an external enemy, but against the fears and doubts that lingered within her own soul. It was a fight. She had to win, for herself and for the world. One evening, as Sarah sat in the castle's courtyard, the night air cool against her skin, Lucian approached. His expression was unreadable, but there was a sense of urgency in his movements. "It's time," he said simply. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Time for what? She had been waiting for the moment when the prophecy would fully reveal itself, when she would have to make the choice that would determine everything. But this felt different. "What's happening?" she asked, rising to her feet. Lucian met her gaze, his amber eyes intense. "The darkness is moving closer," he said, "and it's time for you to confront it." Sarah swallowed hard. She had known this day was coming, but the reality of it was far more daunting than she had imagined. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice trembled. Lucian nodded, his gaze softening for a brief moment. "You are. But remember, this will not be easy. The path you take now will shape everything." He turned and began walking toward the edge of the courtyard, motioning for her to follow. As they walked, the weight of his words settled into Sarah's chest. She had always felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong in this world of power and ancient magic. But now, She was at the center of it all. The fate of the world rested on her shoulders, and she couldn't back down. They made their way to the castle's outer gates, where Lucian stopped and turned to face her. "This is where the journey begins," he said, his voice steady. Sarah looked around, her heart pounding. The castle's grounds were dark, the trees casting long shadows in the dim light. In the distance, she could feel the presence of something that had been waiting for her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm not afraid," she said, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. Lucian's expression softened slightly. "I know, but the darkness will try to break you. It will try to make you doubt everything you believe in. That is what you must overcome." With a final glance at her, Lucian stepped forward, his presence commanding, yet reassuring. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm. Sarah nodded, the resolve in her heart hardening. "I'm ready." They stepped through the gates together, leaving the castle behind as they ventured into the unknown. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but Sarah no longer felt lost. She was not the same woman who had stumbled into the castle all those weeks ago. She was someone else now, someone with purpose, someone who had the power to shape the world. The further they walked, the closer they drew to the source of the darkness that had threatened everything. Sarah's heart raced with each step, but the fear that had once consumed her was now replaced with a fierce determination. She wasn't just walking into the unknown. She was walking into her future, her destiny. Lucian glanced at her, his eyes full of pride. "Trust in yourself, Sarah. The power you have inside you is your greatest strength, but it will also be your greatest challenge." Sarah nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The power inside her wasn't just a tool to fight with. It was a part of her, a reflection of her very soul. And like her soul, it was both beautiful and terrifying. She wasn't sure how she would face the darkness ahead, but one thing was certain. She would face it, and she would fight for the future of the world she had come to care for. As they walked deeper into the night, Sarah felt the stirrings of something within her. The prophecy was no longer just a story, it was her reality. She was the one who would decide what happened next. And with each step, she grew stronger. The world was waiting, and she was ready to meet it head-on. As Sarah and Lucian ventured deeper into the unknown, the weight of the journey ahead settled heavily on her shoulders. The path was shrouded in mist, the trees towering over them like silent sentinels, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. The air felt thick, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Despite the cold, Sarah felt a strange warmth radiating from within her. The power that had been awakened inside her was no longer something she feared. It was part of her now, and with each step she took, it seemed to grow stronger. Lucian walked beside her, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in this. She had come to rely on him in ways she hadn't anticipated, his guidance grounding her, even when her mind raced with questions and uncertainties. Yet, there was a part of her that knew that the true test had just begun. "Do you feel it?" Lucian's voice broke through her thoughts, calm and steady as always. Sarah nodded, her senses alert as she scanned the darkened forest around them. The air felt heavier now, more oppressive. The darkness wasn't just a vague threat anymore. It was real, and it was closing in. "It's getting stronger," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian's gaze flickered to her, his eyes narrowing as he looked ahead. "Yes, we're close." Sarah's heart began to race, her mind struggling to process the enormity of the situation. The darkness they were about to face wasn't just some force from the shadows. It was tied to her bloodline, and the prophecy that had been set in motion long before she had ever understood what was happening. She had trained, she had learned to harness her power, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The culmination of everything, her past, her family's legacy, the curse, the prophecy, was about to collide, and Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for it. But she knew one thing. There was no turning back. As they continued forward, the path grew steeper, the trees closing in around them as if they were being drawn towards something deep within the heart of the forest. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the dry leaves beneath their feet. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Sarah stumbled slightly, reaching out to steady herself against the trunk of a nearby tree. Lucian didn't flinch, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the calm intensity she had come to expect from him. "It's here," he said, his voice low but filled with an unmistakable urgency. Sarah looked around, her pulse quickening. The air grew colder, the trees now towering over them like dark, looming figures. A faint, eerie glow began to emerge from deeper within the forest, casting an unsettling light that made the shadows around them feel alive. The power that had been building within her stirred again, stronger than before, and Sarah felt a surge of energy rushing through her veins. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Lucian turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said, his tone serious. "We don't know what lies ahead, but we must be ready for anything." Sarah nodded, her mind racing as they moved forward, closer to the source of the darkness. She could feel it now, swirling around them, pulling at the edges of her consciousness. It was no longer just a vague presence. It was real, and it was waiting. The glow grew brighter, and they found themselves standing before a massive stone structure, ancient and worn by time. It looked like a temple, or perhaps a crypt, with intricate carvings covering the surface of the stone, telling stories of forgotten gods and battles fought long ago. The entrance was wide open, an ominous void that beckoned them inside. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the place where it all began. Lucian stepped forward, and Sarah followed, her every instinct telling her to turn back, to run, but she couldn't. She had come too far to turn back now. As they entered the darkened chamber, the air grew colder still. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the carvings on the stone moving slightly, as if alive. At the far end of the room, a pedestal stood, and on it rested an object that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Sarah's heart raced as she moved closer, the power within her swelling in response to whatever lay before her. "This is where it all began," Lucian murmured, his voice low as he reached out to touch the pedestal. "This is where your bloodline first became tied to the darkness. The key to everything is here, Sarah." Sarah's eyes moved to the object on the pedestal, her breath catching in her chest. It was a stone, dark as night, with a faint glow radiating from within it. She could feel its power, its connection to her bloodline, as if it were calling to her. The stone seemed to pulse, responding to her presence, and in that moment, she realized what it was. It was the source of the curse, of the power she wielded, and of the choice she would have to make. Lucian stepped back, his gaze fixed on her. "This is it, Sarah. The heart of the prophecy. What you do next will determine everything." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the stone, her fingers brushing against its surface. The moment her skin made contact, a surge of energy flooded her body, filling her with an overwhelming sense of power and knowledge. Visions flashed before her eyes, images of her ancestors, of battles fought, of blood spilled, and of the darkness that had been sealed away for centuries. She saw herself, standing at the center of it all, the key to either sealing the darkness away once more or releasing it into the world. Her heart pounded as the weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. She had come to this moment, prepared to face whatever came, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she could bear the consequences of her choice. Lucian's voice cut through the swirling thoughts in her mind. "You are ready, Sarah. The choice is yours." Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear, she had to make her choice. The fate of the world rested in her hands, and no matter what happened, she would face it with everything she had. As Sarah stood there, her hand resting on the dark stone of the pedestal, the surge of power coursing through her veins, she could feel the gravity of the decision that lay before her. The visions had stopped, and the intense rush of energy had begun to subside, leaving her feeling both drained and alive. The stone still pulsed faintly, as if waiting for her to make her final choice. Lucian's presence behind her was a steady anchor, but even he seemed to sense the weight of this moment. She could hear his breathing, feel the intensity of his gaze on her back. But it wasn't just his eyes that she felt on her. It was the entire world's. She was the key to sealing the darkness away forever or allowing it to spread its chaos once more. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had known that her family's bloodline was tied to the curse, but the truth had hit her harder than she ever imagined. She was a descendant of warriors, of those who had fought and sacrificed to keep the world safe from the darkness that sought to consume it. And now, she was being asked to choose, to protect the world or to destroy it. the fear that had been growing in her heart for days finally began to take hold, and she felt the weight of her ancestors' struggles press down on her. Could she really live up to their legacy? Could she face the darkness inside her and the one that was about to be unleashed? Sarah, Lucian's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone steady yet filled with something deeper. You have to decide. She turned to look at him, her heart racing, her breath shallow. She saw the concern in his eyes, the understanding, but also the quiet strength. He had never been afraid of what lay ahead, but now she realized he wasn't just guiding her. He believed in her, and that belief was both a gift and a burden. I can't do this alone, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Lucian nodded slowly, stepping forward, his expression softening. You're not alone, Sarah. You never have been. He reached out, gently lifting her hand from the stone, his fingers warm against hers. But this choice, this responsibility, is yours to bear. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the racing thoughts in her mind. It was true. She couldn't face this decision for anyone but herself. Her ancestors had made their choices. Now it was her turn. Slowly, she turned back to the pedestal and the stone that rested upon it. The darkness was real. It was closing in, and the world, as Lucian had said, was waiting for her to act. She was the one who had to choose. And as much as it terrified her, she knew there was no other way. She couldn't allow the darkness to spread. She couldn't let everything her family had fought for be in vain. She wasn't just the key to the curse. She was the one who would end it. With a steadying breath, Sarah spoke, her voice filled with quiet resolve. I choose to stop it. Lucian's gaze softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Then let's go, he said, his voice filled with approval. We face this together. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as they began to move toward the exit of the chamber. The weight of her decision still hung in the air, but now there was a sense of purpose in her step. She wasn't the same woman who had entered the castle all those days ago, uncertain and afraid. She was stronger now. She had embraced her power, and with Lucian by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. They moved through the darkened corridors of the castle, the stone walls seeming to close in around them as they made their way toward the heart of the temple. The air grew colder, the silence more oppressive, but Sarah didn't falter. She was ready. As they reached the heart of the temple, the glow from the stone grew brighter, illuminating the room in a soft, eerie light. Sarah felt the pull of the power in the air, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate through her very soul. She could feel the darkness now, too, its presence, its hunger, and the weight of it bearing down on her. It was time. Lucian stood beside her, his expression unwavering as he watched the stone, waiting for the moment when Sarah would make her final choice. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes locked on the stone as it pulsed with an almost malevolent energy. This was it. She was going to face it. She had made her choice. Slowly, she reached out toward the stone, her fingers trembling slightly, but her heart steady. As her hand made contact with the stone, the power surged through her, more intense than ever before. The darkness recoiled, as if sensing her resolve. The stone cracked beneath her touch, and Sarah felt a rush of energy, an overwhelming wave that threatened to drown her. But she stood firm, channeling every ounce of strength she had into the stone, forcing the darkness to recede. The air around her thickened, and for a moment, she could feel herself slipping, could feel the weight of the darkness trying to drag her under. But then Lucian's voice pierced through the fog in her mind, steady and sure. You are stronger than this, Sarah. You are the light. And in that moment, she understood. The power she held wasn't just about destruction. It was about balance. She could stop the darkness, not by overpowering it, but by controlling it, by embracing the light within herself. With a final surge of energy, the stone shattered, and the darkness began to dissolve. The room fell silent once more, and the oppressive weight that had filled the air was lifted. Sarah's body trembled with exhaustion, but she stood tall. She had done it. The darkness had been sealed away, for now. Lucian stepped forward, his hand resting on her shoulder. You did it, he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with both relief and something else, something deeper. She had faced the darkness, and she had chosen the light. And in doing so, She had found the strength she never knew she had. The silence that followed the destruction of the stone was profound. Sarah stood at the heart of the temple, the remnants of the dark energy swirling around her, but fading with each passing second. The weight that had once pressed down on her chest had lifted, and though she felt utterly exhausted, she also felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She had done it. The darkness had been sealed, the prophecy fulfilled. But as the echoes of the battle faded, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. The battle was over, but what now? She had chosen to fight for the light, for the world, and in doing so, she had proved herself. But the world, the life she had known, had changed in ways she could never fully understand. She wasn't the same person who had stumbled into the castle weeks ago. The journey had transformed her, had awakened something deep inside her that she could never undo. Lucian stepped beside her, his presence a grounding force that anchored her in the moment. He had been with her from the beginning, guiding her, believing in her when she could not believe in herself. Now, as they stood in the aftermath of the battle, she saw him in a new light, no longer just a protector, but someone who had become an integral part of her journey. "You did it," Lucian said, his voice filled with pride, though it was tempered with the understanding of how much she had sacrificed. "We did it," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her. She turned to look at him, meeting his gaze with a newfound strength. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lucian smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the same quiet pride she felt. "You've always had the strength, Sarah. You just needed to see it for yourself." As Sarah absorbed his words, a calm certainty settled in her heart. She had done what was necessary, but it wasn't just about saving the world or fulfilling the prophecy. It was about reclaiming herself, about finding the strength within to not just survive, but to rise. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The temple was quiet now, the only sound the soft wind rustling through the trees outside. The battle had been won, but the future was still uncertain. Lucian's gaze shifted to the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "Now we rebuild. The darkness has been held at bay, but there will always be challenges ahead. The world is a delicate balance, and you, Sarah, have shown that you are the guardian of that balance." She nodded slowly, her heart swelling with the weight of responsibility. The fight was over, but the work was just beginning. The darkness might have been sealed, but there were still remnants, echoes, that needed to be kept at bay. The world would continue to change, and Sarah would be there, standing as its protector. As she turned away from the temple, Lucian by her side, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be more battles, more tests of her strength, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her place in this world, and she would fight for it. They walked together, back through the castle, their steps in sync, a silent understanding between them. The future was uncertain, but with each other, they were ready to face whatever came next. And as they stepped out into the moonlit night, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The world was still a dangerous place, but it was also beautiful. And for the first time, Sarah saw her future as something she could shape, something worth fighting for. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Get ready for a thrilling adventure in this captivating vampire story that takes you on a journey filled with power, ancient curses, and the battle between light and darkness. Follow the transformation of a woman who discovers her powerful bloodline, one that ties her to an ancient prophecy. As she unlocks her hidden powers, she must decide whether to use them to protect the world or unleash destruction. Filled with suspense and intrigue, this story will keep you on the edge of your seat as the stakes rise and the fate of the world hangs in the balance. This gripping tale is one of the most exciting vampire stories to date, blending mystery, romance, and fantasy into a narrative that will leave you hooked. Join the protagonist as she learns the truth about her heritage and faces challenges that will test her to her limits. As the darkness looms, she must navigate the complexities of her power, the prophecy, and the forces that wish to control her. Will she rise as the hero or succumb to the darkness within? Find out in this unforgettable tale that will resonate with fans of vampire stories and those seeking a thrilling, action-packed read. The ancient secrets, the choices between good and evil, and the powerful connections make this a must-read for anyone who loves vampire stories. Experience the twists and turns that keep you guessing as the story builds toward its explosive climax. Get lost in this world of supernatural creatures, magical battles, and the unforgettable struggle between fate and free will. The journey is just beginning, and there is much more to uncover in this amazing collection of vampire stories.